Hello and welcome to Fantastic Fights, the podcast about a middle-aged man playing adventure game books out loud on the internet. That middle-aged man is me, Hieronymus J. Doom, and this is another bonus episode of the podcast made possible by my patrons over at patreon.com/HJDoom. It's thanks to their generosity that these bonus episodes come out almost every month and are free for everyone to listen to. If you're enjoying this podcast, then do consider tipping me £1 or so to support my work. All support is gratefully received, and all patrons get access to the various game books I have written over the years as a special reward. I'm currently in the early stages of a new game book, which is very exciting, but I don't want to reveal too much at this point because things don't always pan out the way I would hope. But I am actively developing a new project, several new projects, and I'll hopefully be able to share more details soon. This episode is a change from the one I'd hoped to do for a variety of dull real-life reasons, but it's still quite an interesting prospect because we're playing Marvel Superheroes TM, The Amazing Spider-Man TM, Gamebook 1 City of Darkness by Jeff Grubb, with art by Alan Cooperberg and Keith Williams. It was released in 1987 by Puffin Books at the height of the adventure gamebook boom of the 80s. Puffin, obviously a big deal in the gamebook space because they were the publishers of Fighting Fantasy. I am a big comics guy, but I'm not a big mainstream superhero comics guy. I like stories with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and both Marvel and DC have a pathological aversion to ending things which I find deeply frustrating. There is bits and pieces which I have enjoyed over the years. I have a real soft spot for the early Fantastic Four comics which were created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and there's some odd runs on other characters which I've liked, such as Warren Ellis's brief time on Moon Knight and Grant Morrison's stint writing Justice League, but in general I'm not especially bothered by men and women in silly costumes who absolutely refuse to die. I like Spider-Man well enough as a concept. He's got something of an everyman quality that I do enjoy, but I am far from any kind of expert on his backstory, so I'll probably make some absolute howlers during the recording of this podcast, which any hardcore Marvel heads are welcome to pick me up on. I've said before that superhero gamebooks can be a bit tricky, especially when dealing with pre-existing characters. Steve Jackson made a decent fist of it with Appointment with Fear, but that was an original character and an original setting, and pre-existing characters come loaded down with additional baggage. In particular, the ways in which traditional gamebooks seek to challenge the player can create odd outcomes, such as the beloved hero getting the stuffing knocked out of them by some random mook, or completely failing at things they're supposed to be supernaturally gifted at doing. It's not an insurmountable challenge by any means. You can absolutely create bespoke systems that model the narrative tropes of superhero comics, but it requires a degree of subtlety and an approach to mechanics that really wasn't the status quo in 1987. Our scribe, Jeff Grubb, is certainly an experienced writer and game designer. He actually worked on the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game, which was published by TSR in the 80s, and which I think informs the design of the Marvel Superheroes gamebook line. He's written extensively for Dungeons & Dragons, as well as penning novels based on the worlds of D&D and Magic the Gathering, among others. He ought to be a pretty safe pair of hands for this sort of thing, but I am mindful that the approach of a traditional role-playing game designer doesn't always map perfectly into the gamebook sphere. Now, I'm expecting this book to be very much a product of the 80s design sensibility that tends to approach everything through the lens of Dungeons & Dragons. With that in mind, let's have a look at the rules. The rule set is kind of busy considering this book is only slightly north of 200 paragraphs long. You start with 32 health points, which are unsurprisingly your health. You also get 12 karma points, which can be spent to give you a bonus to any roll. But you must decide to spend the karma before you actually make the roll, and you have to spend at least 2 karma, but there is no upper limit to the amount you can spend, and each point of karma adds +1 to the outcome of the roll. Rolls are made by rolling a single die and adding the relevant skill, and you're aiming to beat a difficulty number which will be set by the text. I really like the sound of this karma system. The ability to dig deep and do the actually heroic thing at the point at which it's most important feels like a really, really good mechanic to have in a superhero gamebook. You also have a list of abilities which I would describe as unnecessarily long. I'm just going to quickly list them off along with what I think is their starting value. There's supposed to be a card with the full stat list included with the book, but it is missing in the copy of the book I have, and I'm working off a list I found on the internet. I think they are mostly self-explanatory. So we have a fighting score of 6, an agility score of 10, a strength score of 8, an endurance score of 8, a reason score of 4, an intuition score of 10, a psyche score of 8, and an agility with webbing score of a whopping 16. A reason of 4 seems low for a character who's supposed to be a highly skilled chemist, but maybe that's literally the only thing he knows anything about. I've no idea what these stats mean in terms of the gamebook. I guess we're going to find out together. The difference between the lowest score of 4 and the highest score of 16 is 12, which is frankly insane for a system based around rolling 1d6 and adding your relevant stat. If I was going to place a bet, I'd say that the actual stat numbers are completely irrelevant, because the author is simply going to pick a target number which gives a chance of success on the roll he reckons feels about right. Let's find out together as we play Marvel Superheroes TM, The Amazing Spider-Man TM, Gamebook 1, City in Darkness. So, let's find out what awaits Mr. Spider-Man TM. You move through the brightly lit canyons of the city on a single strand of webbing. Below you, the city is ablaze with light, from the powerful spotlights framing its most famous buildings to the soft glow of hundreds of street lamps and apartment windows. It is early summer, and the warm weather has brought out most of New York's population. Couples stroll along the sidewalk, stopping to watch breakdancers and mimes. Good God. I mean, breakdancing is fair enough, but I'm assuming you only stop to watch a mime out of pity? Or to point them out to your children and say, this is what can happen if you don't pay attention in school. This is what you can end up doing. Executives out on the town hail taxis bound for the theatre district. Street musicians sound out hot, muggy tones on saxes and clarinets, providing background music for the small-time hustlers playing the crowd with games of 3-card Monty. You have a bird's eye view of it all, or in your case, a spider's eye view. You swing down the street high above the normal hustle and bustle, your web lines arching from their special web shooters strapped to your wrists, providing a set of lines to carry you from building to building. You've got to get across town fast. A meeting with Daily Bugle editor Robbie Robertson was supposed to start 5 minutes ago, and lateness is not a virtue looked for in freelance photographers, not even when Jolly Jonah Jameson was in charge. Why have we got a different Daily Bugle editor? I thought J. Jonah Jameson was always the editor of the Daily Bugle, and he's a really good character, because he's furious all the time about everything, in particular Spider-Man. Why would you change that? Oh well. Of course, you muse. When it absolutely, positively has to get there overnight, Web Slinger Express is the only way to travel. So a little bit of a quip there from Spider-Man. I think that is one of his defining features, is his tendency to quip and make light of serious situations, which was genuinely, I believe, fairly novel when the character was created, but is now what literally every single character in every single piece of media does all the time. You hit a break between the buildings where your lines might not reach the next tall structure. Rather than risk missing a shot, you tuck into a roll, straighten at the last instant, and make a perfect 2-point landing on a movie marquee. So, it's doing a really bang-up job of introducing Spider-Man for those who may not be super familiar with the character, and showing the kind of stuff that he gets up to. And I think it's a lovely opening to just start with Spider-Man doing the most Spider-Man thing, which is web-slinging his way around New York. "Hey, it's Spider-Man!" shouts a voice from the crowd below. Heads turning, you feel the gaze of your admiring public. "Wow! Neat! I thought he was from an imaginary story. George, get out to the camera." See, I've decided that New York is much more multicultural than even famously multicultural actual New York. And by multicultural, I mean there are an awful lot of expats from various regions of the British Isles. The tribulations of being a well-known superpowered hero, you think, chuckling. Adored by millions, or at least hundreds, capable of stunts only dreamed of by mere mortals. In reality, mild-mannered camera hound Peter... "Ya bum!" The last comment breaks through your reverie and catches you by surprise. Not the words of an admirer, even in New York City. You scan the crowd below to see who your detractor is. "Yeah, you, spider bum. You're a menace. You're a menace to society. I read about it in the Daily Bugle. Jameson says you're a crook." The speaker is a nondescript man, about 30, wearing a tan windbreaker and a Mets cap. You could pass him on the street without even noticing him. Beneath your mask, you frown deeply. "Okay, hero," you think, "do you really want to take this kind of guff, or do you want to teach this loudmouth a lesson? Are you willing to put up with a little verbal abuse, or would you rather deal directly with the lout?" I think I'm willing to put up with a little verbal abuse. I don't really care. I feel like being obsessed with wanting everyone to like you is the mark of quite a small-minded person. I don't mean wanting people to like you in the generic sense of wanting to be a good person who people like. I mean that there are some people who just have this profound aversion to the idea that someone might not care for them. And I think that can be really unhealthy. You're a superhero. Why do you care that some guy in a windbreaker doesn't much like you? It's going to impact on your day not at all, really. So yeah, we'll put up with the verbal abuse. "According to the Bugle, I'm the Hulk's tailor," you shout back, already shooting out your next webline. "And if you believe that, there's this bridge I want to sell you." A ripple of laughter runs through the gathering crowd, leaving the heckler red and fuming. Unwilling to spend a beautiful summer evening arguing with a heckler, you swing off, climbing the webline as you go. Gain 1 karma point for keeping your temper in the face of adversity. I mean, it's not really adversity. Some guy being a bit of a dick is not proper adversity. I mean, I should qualify that as well, I guess. It's not proper adversity if you're Spider-Man and have the ability to punch his face in without breaking a sweat. It might well be adversity for someone lower down the totem pole. It can be very horrible being shouted at in the street. But if you're Spider-Man, that's not adversity. That's just some guy being low-grade unpleasant. You should be able to shrug it off. But still, we got a point of karma out of it, so we're now up to 13 karma. You only get about half a block away when you hear the loud, dull whoomph of an explosion nearby. The explosion is followed by the chatter of gunfire, mixed with an electric crackle that sounds like a high school experiment gone wild. Robbie Robertson and the Daily Bugle will have to wait. Something has come up, something that may require the presence of your friendly neighbourhood Spider-Man. You kick into high gear. So again, we're doing a bang-up job by dropping us straight into the kind of low-level street crime that Spider-Man very frequently, I think, has to deal with. The shots are coming from nearby. Swinging around the corner, you get a full picture from 3 stories above street level. The centre of the street is blocked by an overturned armoured security truck. The truck bears the insignia of a blue horse's head, but otherwise looks like US government standard issue. The truck's massive rear door has been blown off its hinges and is lying nearby. Army jeeps, also with the horse head symbol, are pulled over in front and back of the truck, apparently escorts for whatever was inside. The occupants of the jeeps, men and women dressed in blue uniforms, have piled out and are using the vehicles for cover. Their attackers are across the street, crouched in an alleyway. 2 men dressed in green bodysuits carrying huge weapons that look like World War II bazookas. These weapons are the source of the unearthly crackling you heard earlier, and the pair are firing random bolts of yellowish lightning at the guards. So there is a picture of the criminals attacking the jeeps and the armoured truck. It is small but perfectly serviceable. Spider-Man is in the frame. Looking down on it, it is an unusual angle to be viewing the action from, and I think that makes it a little bit more interesting than it would otherwise have been. It's very standard 80s illustration, but none the worse for that. The smoke from the fight clears for a moment, and you see in neat lettering beneath the symbol on the truck the word Pegasus. Good gravy, you suddenly realise. The boys and girls in blue are from Project Pegasus. Pegasus is an energy project located in upstate New York, funded by the Department of Energy. In the past, The project has investigated alternate forms of energy, including those possessed by superpowered bad guys, a number of whom are your old foes. An empty armoured truck does not bode well. At least I know whose team I'm on. Whoever would try and knock over a Pegasus transport has to be up to no good. I'm beginning to see why Spider-Man only has a reason of 4. You're not sure why these two groups chose a New York street to fight in, but it's apparent that the guys in green are not too worried about inflicting civilian casualties. This looks like a job tailor-made for the web-spinning wonder, and it might be a good time to pick up a few bucks shooting Spider-Man in action. Should you wade into battle, or should you first take the time to set up your camera? So that's a cool thing. I'm going to set up my camera because if I do know that Peter Parker basically makes all of his money taking photographs of Spider-Man, which is himself. So we'll set up the camera. You find a likely-looking ledge nearby, and drawing your camera out from your belt, mount it firmly with a dab of webbing. You set the automatic timer to shoot the full roll at 5-second intervals. All of these actions come automatically, smoothly developed over years of taking pictures of yourself in action. These pictures, sold first to Jameson and later Robertson at the Daily Bugle, have supplemented your income over the years and now are your main source of ready cash. So, again, spelling it out, if people are not super familiar with Spider-Man, makes all the sense in the world. You watch the unfolding battle and notice that the guys in the blue jumpsuits from Project Pegasus are taking a pounding from their attackers. There doesn't seem to be a lot of movement around the truck, one of those heavily armoured monsters that the government favours, but fortunately there are no bodies either. The guys with the lightning-firing bazookas look like members of Hydra, but the green of their uniforms is too washed out and they are missing the distinctive H on the front. Could some other flaky subversive group with bad-tasting clothes have picked these outfits up at a rummage sale and decided to blow up government vehicles? A man dressed like Spider-Man has absolutely no business mocking other people's sartorial choices. Your fashion analysis is forgotten as your spider sense, the super-powered sense that warns you of immediate danger, kicks into full gear. One of the goons in the alley has spotted you, and the way your spider sense is buzzing tells you he's got you lined up in the crosshairs of his weapon. Make an agility feat roll to get out of the way. Remember to add any karma you wish before you make the roll, and you need a 12 or more. So that's 1d6 plus 10. So we're only failing on a roll of a 1. So I don't think I'll spend any karma on that. I roll a 13, which is more than enough to get out of the way. You dodge out of the way at the last moment as the massive bolt of electricity carves a huge gash out of the wall, just inches away from your camera. If you weren't sure before that the guys with the heavy artillery are the bad guys, that little bit of hate mail convinces you. Not only are these fellows dangerous, they're downright unfriendly. Could it be they're friends of that loudmouth Mets fan, or at least have been reading the same editorials? Your dodging drops you down to just above street level. One of the Pegasus guards spots you and waves you away. "Get back!" she shouts. "It's dangerous around here." "Surely you jest," you snap back. "It's more dangerous getting a cab when the theatre's let out than this little garden party." You're too low to web up the bad guys without catching some innocent bystanders. Your best move would be to try and get between the two thugs. You tense your muscles to leap across the street. This is doing a really good job of feeling kind of like Spider-Man. Admittedly, it feels a bit like a Spider-Man comic that's been kicked in the head by a horse, but all of the elements of Spider-Man are already present and correct. Flexing the muscles that give you the proportional strength and agility of a spider, you leap into the fray. A bolt of energy sears across the street, blasting the wall directly behind you. If I'd hung around there, I'd be a crispy critter for sure, you think, somersaulting over the lines of Pegasus guards. "Hold your fire, ladies and gents," you shout, bouncing off the hood of the closest jeep. "Perforating my uniform with lead violates its warranty, and will mess up your civil service record something fierce." A blast of lightning-like force ionizes the air on top of the jeep where you stood just moments before the flash has dimmed you across the street directly above the goons. "If I didn't know better, I'd say you didn't like me. You've been reading Jameson's editorials in the Bugle again, haven't you?" you quip, as you drop down between them. "If you surrender now, I'll let Jolly Jonah visit your cell." Eat Shockzooka Blast, web spinner, says the thug on the right as he fires a blast from his futuristic weapon. Shockzooka, you laugh, dodging the fiery blast. You'd think that the people who invent these deadly gadgets would at least come up with an original name. Sounds like something that attacked Tokyo. Before the thug can get in another shot, you rush him, grabbing the battery-operated bazooka and ripping it from his grasp. The goon on your left, a little dumpier than the others, watches in wonderment, muttering, "He moves so fast." The second goon seems so amazed by your speed he has forgotten to aim his own weapon at you. "You guys are just slowpokes," you taunt, lashing out with both arms at the assailants. And now, it's nighty-night time. So we need to make a fighting feat roll. If the total is 8 or less, something probably quite bad happens. If it's a 9, 10 or 11, something better happens. And if it's a 12 or more, something further and potentially even better happens. So my fighting score is 6. So to get the best outcome, I would need a 6. A 1 or a 2 would get me the worst outcome. So I'm not too worried about anything other than the worst outcome. I think I'm going to risk it. I don't think I'm going to spend any karma on this. I roll a 2, giving me a total of 8. So I should have spent some karma. That's on me. You land between the two goons, but they saw you coming. One is already turning to run, the other is bringing up his weapon to block your punch. You leap at the one with the weapon, hoping to bowl him over and knock him into his fleeing companion. In mid-leap, there is a blinding flash. You don't connect with the thug as the force of an explosion blasts you and the criminals out of the alleyway. As you are lifted bodily into the air, you have a brief glimpse of the alley and of an open manhole spitting fire like a small volcano. So that could have gone better. You're lifted off your feet by the shock of the blast. The ground is shattered into a crazy quilt of broken asphalt. Make an endurance feat, and we want 11 or more. So endurance 8. So again, a 1 or a 2 is the only thing that's going to be a problem for this. So I think again, what are the chances of rolling another 1 or a 2? Yeah, I'm fine. I roll a 4, which gives me a total of 12. Oh, no. Endurance was 8. Oh, well, I needed a 4 plus to actually make the roll. I totally should have used karma on that. That's a terrible, terrible idea. Oh well, I've made it anyway, and that's the main thing. The darkness of the alley is brilliantly lit for half a heartbeat. The ground heaves and cracks run through the walls. You are thrown clear of the mouth of the alley and only avoid injury from a piece of flying pipe by curling into a rolling crouch. You land on the overturned security truck. Smoke drifts through the alleyway. Your two playmates are sprawled at the mouth of the alley. Guards from the Pegasus Project are already checking on them, while others are moving down the alley itself. A tall blonde woman dressed in a blue jumpsuit stands in the middle of the scene barking orders. Her hair is pulled into a tight bun, and she seems to be taking the entire situation, explosion included, as a personal affront. "Get down the alley," she shouts at a pair of guards. "Try to find them." "Find who?" you ask, jumping down next to her. She glances at you long enough to know that you're still among the living, but doesn't reply. Find who? You still want to know. You thought you already took care of the crooks who were involved. One of the guards approaches you and the blonde woman. "I've gotten in touch with the New York Police Department. The paramedics are on the way. The police have put out an all-points bulletin for them." "All-points bulletin? Who are you looking for?" you ask, but again receive no answer. "I just saw 2 goons. How many more were there?" Another of the guards comes back from the alley. "Explosions in the sewers, ma'am. Awful mess. Must have been an arms depot or something. No sign of them. They must have had a vehicle waiting on the other side of the alley." "Now, just a cockamamie minute," you shout, twisting around to face the head honcho. "Who is missing? Who got away? And who are you looking for?" She stares at you for a moment as if you just wandered onto the scene. "I suppose you would need to know," she says. "You miss seeing them take him away." Let's say that, given the fact that I almost had my head handed to me by thugs with blasters and bombs, I'm more than mildly curious. Mentally, you're counting to 10. We were escorting a prisoner from Project Pegasus to a parole hearing when we were ambushed, she replies. The prisoner's name was Maxwell Dillon. You probably know him better as Electro. And there's a little picture of Electro underneath. That's very small, but perfectly adequate. Electro, if you don't know, wears a kind of electrical starfish mask. It's very, very stupid. Electro. Early in your career as a web-spinning wonder, you first crossed paths with Maxwell Dillon, better known as the villainous Electro. A freak bolt of lightning transformed him from a lineman from the Consolidated Edison into a master of living electricity, who promptly turned his newfound talents to crime. Each time he has gone on a rampage, you have hunted him down and caught him, and each time he has found a way to escape. A wave of rage passes through you. To be so close and to have him get away! Electro was never one to learn his lesson or even lie low. He'll be around looking for revenge, and until he makes his move, you and the people around Spider-Man are targets. Spider-Man? The commander of the Pegasus security force intrudes on your thoughts. I would like to thank you for your help. When these thugs recover, maybe we'll get some answers. Right, you say, shaking your head. But by that time, Electro will be miles away. She shrugs her shoulders. We do the best we can, when we can. Look at these clowns. They're going to St. Arbogast's hospital. Is there somewhere you can be reached when they come to? I'll be around. Have it your way, then, she says, nodding. If you have problems, tell them that Captain Nash sent you. With that, she turns away and starts shouting at her troops. You men, clear those jeeps out of the way. Let's let those ambulances in. Blashfield, you and Lawson, help set up the barriers. Have the police brass arrived yet? Just wonderful, you think, brooding. Electro on the loose, and all I caught was a couple of small fry. To top it off, Peter Parker is even later for that meeting. Some days, as the rabbit said, you should have stood in bed. You leap atop the overturned truck, bouncing off its Pegasus emblem. At the high point of the leap, you let loose a single strand of webbing, mooring it against a handy flagpole jutting from the Empire State Building 3 stories above you. Twisting your body, you swing up to the high point, and then fire another strand, and in this fashion swing off into the night, hoping to make it to the Daily Bugle before Robbie gives up hope on you. Behind you, the whine of the police sirens and the shouts of Captain Nash are lost in the rest of the city noise. So we've had a decent tangle with some criminal element, and we've introduced one of Spider-Man's rogues gallery, Electro. That's really good. I think this is doing a bang-up job, honestly, of selling me on the fantasy of being Spider-Man. I'm really, actually, much more impressed than I was expecting. Systems-wise, a bit more of a mixed bag, but in terms of just giving you that feel that you are Spider-Man, it's really, really quite good. Really, really quite good. What a stupid thing to say. Like, really or quite? Choose one. Interlude. Deep beneath the city, a hovercraft settles to rest outside an entrance to an underground labyrinth unrecorded on any city maps. 2 men dressed in green uniforms disembark, manhandling a bound human form between them, a form struggling in a bulky straitjacket. The pair and their prisoner approach the entrance, and a pair of massive doors slides open to receive them. The bound figure is not gagged, and his voice rings down the tunnels as his captors half lead, half carry him onwards. "Dolts!" shouts the captive. "Don't you realise who I am? Don't you know what I can do? I demand that you turn me loose, fools! Now!" The captors make no acknowledgement of the figure's demands, but herd him through one more set of doors. Max Dillon, called Electro by those who know and fear him, is pushed roughly through the doors into a small cell, empty, save for a circle of bright light. His captors shove him harder than necessary, and he topples to his knees in the centre of the light. The doors clank shut and lock behind him, and he is left alone. His solitude is broken by a crackling voice that erupts from a hidden loudspeaker. "Welcome to my sanctuary, Electro," intones the voice. "I'm sorry that you had to receive such rough treatment at the hands of my men. But They were instructed not to let you out of your insulated straitjacket until we had had a talk. I have need of you, Electro. You and your special talents. Electro blinks in the strong light for a moment, straining at his bindings. I know your voice, he says, staggering to his feet. I know you. Listen, we can work together. Between the two of us, we can recreate the Sinister Six. The only reply is a long, throaty laugh that reverberates in the cell long after the loudspeaker has been shut off. End of interlude. I think this is great. This is a genuinely awesome thing to include in a game book. I think so many of the fighting fantasy books where the villain is so remote would have been materially improved by having a couple of these interludes to show you what's going on behind the scenes, to make the villain present in a way that they're often not in the main text. Yeah, this is a great literary technique. I think it probably works a little bit better here than maybe in a fighting fantasy book, on the basis that with this being based on comics, there is a sense that you are sort of used to the idea of sometimes viewing the protagonist and sometimes viewing other bits of action. Maybe there'd be some immersion related issues if you were doing it in a classic fighting fantasy book, which do tend to be very, very much from the perspective of one particular character. But I think you could do it. I think you could make it work. And it's certainly a technique I'm going to consider applying to at least some future projects. Probably not the one that I'm working on at the moment, and it's not the right project for that, but I'll be doing another game book after that at some point, so maybe this is something that I can include there. It takes you another 20 minutes to make it to the Daily Bugle building. 30-foot letters spelling out the newspaper's name dominate the 46-story building, illuminated by powerful spotlights. Your destination is the 17th floor, where the city room offices of the paper are located. With a well-practiced flip of your body, you let go of your web line and, tucking into a somersault, land on the vertical surface of the building. Far below you, the New York masses hurry down 2nd Avenue, without thinking to look up and see a man-sized shape scrabbling along the side of the building. You make for the third window over, which you know leads to a convenient supply closet in which you can change back into your civilian clothes. Miss Manners frowns on showing up for meetings in a crime-fighting suit, you think, smiling beneath the mask. The second window over is open and voices come from the office within. "Where's Parker?" says the first, a sharp tone made raspy by a continual diet of cigars. "I don't know, but I've got a few other matters to attend to," says another, more balanced, well-reasoned voice. There is the sound of a chair being moved away from the table. "It seems that Mr. Parker's attitude towards time leaves something to be desired," says yet another voice, female, as the door closes in the room. "At least Sam's here. Let's get started." You move past the window, noting the voices mentally. The first belongs to J. Jonah Jameson, publisher of the Daily Bugle, an avowed Spider-Man foe. The second, Joe Robbie Robertson, the editor-in-chief. Okay, that's the relationship. Jameson's the publisher. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. I told you I wasn't an expert. The third, Catherine Cushing, city editor. She doesn't like you a whole lot either. Wonderful. Robbie never mentioned that Cushing and Jolly Jonah were going to be in on the meeting. Still, it has been a while since you've sent Jameson's blood pressure rising. Do you want to drop in on the meeting for a moment as Spider-Man, or pass on by to the other window? Do you want to spook Jameson, or do you want to hurry up and get to the meeting as Peter Parker? I would like to spook Jameson, please. That feels like a tremendous thing to be doing. I mean, it's one thing to ignore some rando in the street hurling abuse, but I never miss an opportunity to tweak the nose of authority, and J. Jonah Jameson is absolutely authority. Taunting the publisher of a major daily paper is cruel and vicious. It is neither of those things. It is also fun when the publisher in question is J. Jonah Jameson. You peer through the window. Robertson has left the room, but Cushing, Jameson, and a third lanky man you don't recognise are there. Cushing and the lanky gentleman are seated at the conference table, and Jameson is pacing nervously. You know, says Cushing, looking at the pacing Jameson over the top of her glasses, Robertson called Parker first, but we could easily assign another photographer. Maybe roust out one of the staff to meet Sam at the Battery. Parker shows talent from time to time, but his career is almost entirely built on his pictures of Spider-Man. Someone drop my name, you ask, swinging into the office. That maniac wall crawler, shouts Jameson. What are you doing here? I was just passing by when I saw an open window, heard my name mentioned and thought, gee, it's been a long time since I had a heart-to-heart chat with my old buddy Jameson. You throw an arm around the publisher affectionately before he can dodge out of the way. Did I tell you kids that Jonah saved my life at Anzio? Jumped on a grenade to save my platoon. Of course it was really a rotten apple, but it's the thought that counts. A penny for yours, Jonah? Look here, you costumed idiot, splutters Jameson, but you notice that Cushing and the other man are hiding smiles at the publisher's discomfort. You are interrupting a private meeting, not to mention trespassing. Get out of here this instant. Jameson makes his point by slamming both fists on the table. Well, if you're going to be that way about it, you have to say the magic word, you reply. Magic word, bellows the publisher. Please. Jameson's face turns crimson with rage. Well, you say with a smirk, since you put it so nicely, how can I refuse? Oh, and one more thing, you say, turning from the window and wondering if Jameson is going to have a cardiac arrest now or later. I ran into a harried freelance photographer who got caught in traffic. He says to tell Robbie he'll be a little late, but he's en route. Ta-ta, troopies! And look, Jonah, better cut down on those cigars. Looks like they're going to give you high blood pressure. There is a picture of Spider-Man dangling upside down outside the window and Jonah Jameson waving a fist and yelling at him. It's fine. Again, not particularly awesome or anything, but yeah, just a good solid bit of illustration. Jameson's response is as loud as it is unprintable. You dive out of the window and adhere to the wall outside, quickly scrabbling over to the window in case Jolly Jonah leans out of the office to hurl a few more invectives at you. Teasing Jameson is cruel, of course, reduce your karma by 1, but it sure is fun. It's not that cruel. He's a plutocrat, so karma now down to 12. The storage closet is empty and you quickly slip through the open window. Who locks windows 17 stories up? A quick change later and Peter Parker, boy photographer, emerges quietly into the city room, heading for the conference room where Jameson and Cushing were just discussing your relative merits. You're late, says Robbie, parked outside the conference room loading up his pipe. City editor Cushing has no tolerance for smoking, so both Jonah and Robbie have taken to sneaking smokes when not in her presence. Sorry, Robbie, I just got caught in traffic. Everyone in the city is out tonight. I came as fast as I could. Your excuse sounds bad even to you, but Robertson just nods. I realise I called you on short notice, Pete, he says, tamping down the tobacco with his thumb, and I called you because I know you are usually dependable and also need the work. But you aren't established yet with Kate Cushing, and since she normally assigns the jobs, I'm going to have to show up on time. You finish the sentence looking at your shoes. The life of a freelancer is not a whole lot of fun. Okay, Robbie says, lighting his pipe. Kate and Jonah and one of Jonah's freelancers are in there. Looks good for them, and there may be more assignments in the future. And tell Kate something came up. I'll be in my office if she needs me. With that, Robbie heads towards his office, leaving a cloud of pipe smoke behind him. It does seem very transgressive to have characters just smoking heavily in a book aimed at children. Not something that would happen in this day and age, and rightly so. You wanted to see me, you say, entering the conference room. No, I want to see Spider-Man's name under the column Recent Arrests, snaps Jameson. Where the blue thunder have you been? Well, you begin, trying to think of an explanation as you talk. I don't want to hear any excuses, Parker. A newspaper isn't built on excuses, it's built on dedication. Do you know what dedication is, Parker? Dedication is what made this country great. Dedication is how I got where I am today. Dedication is showing up for meetings when I am supposed to. What do you think we are running here, Parker? Well, This is a newspaper, Parker, not some college social club where tardiness is noted by a green star on your name. A newspaper is a business, Parker, and in business, time is money. Millions are wasted each day on long coffee breaks and lunch hours, on people not showing up on time, wasting the time of others, yakking in halls. You look around for support. Jameson's freelancer looks at you and shrugs. He's apparently heard this routine before. Kate Cushing just stares at you in a steely glare that summarises Jameson's ranting in a second. You've failed me, Parker. The glance says, one more failure added to a long string of others. How long must we put up with you? After about 5 minutes of Jameson's speech, he seems to run out of steam, and Kate uses this moment to break in and get the meeting rolling. Peter, this is Sam Capiras. She motions to the other man in the room, who rises from his chair to shake your hand. He's a tall, rumpled man, as lean as a scarecrow, whose clothes hang off him. His eyes, however, are alive and take you in a single glance. Sam works as a freelancer for Now magazine, she continues. He's doing a series on fraud and thievery in the utilities. In his work, he's come up with an amazing fact. Sam? Well, the Scarecrow says as his blue eyes scan an open file folder. There's a large amount of theft in most utilities, employees walking off with things, embezzlement and fraud in the upper ranks, organised criminal activity, the normal sort of thing. However, take a look at this. He shoves a clipping from a local suburban paper towards you. You read it aloud. Dr. Clifford Jefferson, head of the South Bank Psychiatric Facility, has been reported missing as of last Tuesday. Other side, Parker, snaps Jameson. Sighing, you turn the clipping over, though your spider sense begins a low buzzing. Make an intuition feat, and you need a 12 or more, so it's just another 1 in 6 chance to fail. Like I suspected, the actual numbers on your character sheet completely irrelevant because the author is just deciding how easy or difficult it is based on how easy or difficult he wants the role to be. All of these numbers could have been 4. It would make no difference to how the book actually functions. You don't actually need any of these stats at all in a realistic way. You can just have the player make a random roll. I guess you do get a little bit of storytelling through the character sheet, showing the different areas where you're strong and maybe a bit more weak. But, yeah, really, I feel like you could have done that with an awful lot less stats. You don't need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them. I roll a 6, which definitely gets me more than 12 with my intuition of 10. South Brooklyn. That name rings a bell. Of course, that's where they're holding Octo Octavius, better known as Dr. Octopus. Can there be a connection? You make a mental note to follow that up later. Give yourself 1 karma point for recognising the name. Karma now back up to 13. Well, Peter, says Cushing, uneasy with your silence. Oh, sorry, you say, and begin to read the clipping aloud. Consolidated Edison Storage Facility reports massive losses in the first quarter, you read aloud. The Battery Park / South Manhattan No. 6 Storage Facility reports massive losses through theft or unknown damage in the early part of this year. Neither the new head of the facility nor the chief of security has any idea where the materials are being transported out of the warehouses. The storage facility has been upgraded with additional bonded security guards, guard dogs and electronic devices, but thefts are still occurring, including the theft of large items such as conductors, generator coils, massive spools of cable. There seems to be quite the list. It's almost as though someone is trying to create his own electricity company, says Sam. Can anyone do that? Interjects Kate. Not really, replies Sam. Utilities are monopolies by charter, and every time there's a rate hike there's usually some form of investigation. That's how these thefts originally came to light. No, I think whoever is doing this is working in a black market of electronic gear, possibly by selling it overseas, perhaps to unfriendly powers that are boycotted by our country. While the New York electrical consumers are footing the bill, grumbles Jameson. You wonder at Jameson's sudden concern for the consumer. Must own a large number of Codhead bonds. Probably what got him on this case in the first place, you guess. Now Kate breaks in. Sam has a security meeting tonight, with the head of security at Station 6. You ought to go along to take some night shots, since most of the robberies occur at night. Keep your eyes peeled for anything that looks strange. This may be nothing, or it may be a widespread plot that the Bugle can expose. And now magazine can publish in full, adds Jameson, with your pictures. So make it good, Peter, continues Kate. We can use your work. Robbie, she says, as the editor-in-chief comes through the door. This just came over the wires, Robbie says, laying the message on the table. Electro broke out of a Project Pegasus transport just a few blocks from here. Aren't the Pegasus people out of the super bad guy business? For the most part, yes, but they have the facilities to move the criminals, like Electro, from place to place. There seems to be a bunch of energy-type villains on the loose. News is out that Nitro has escaped again. Maybe there is a connection. We know that Electro had help in his escape, and Jonah, Spider-Man, was reported on the scene. You steal a look at Jameson and note that the colour is already creeping into his face. Another explosion coming. Time to exit stage right. Kate slams her file folder closed. Right, let's get a man on the scene. Leeds, Ulrich, whoever's around. Parker, you go with Carpiers on Sam's warehouse case. I'll see if I can scare up another photographer to check the scene. I want to see your material by tomorrow, 10 in the morning. Let's go. The city editor shoots you a glance that seems to say, if I could trust you, I'd send you after the Electro story. Nice job, Parker, you think. Kate leaves the room and Robbie follows. You and Capires edge out, leaving a fuming J. Jonah Jameson behind. As you depart, you hear him utter a single name. Spider-Man! He says it like a curse. You sometimes agree with that sentiment. Interlude. The criminal master of electricity wakes slowly. Does he detect something in the air? Yes, a knockout gas was pumped into his cell. How long has he been out? Minutes? Hours? Electro stretches, then realises that his arms are no longer bound. He lashes out quickly, but finds his full reach blocked by a curved, smooth surface. He's enclosed in some kind of sphere. He hammers, but it won't break. If it's glass, it's the type they make aircraft windows out of. His hammering produces a muffled ringing and a response. He spots a light off to his right, a single bulb piercing his cage. Shadows move in front of the light. Where is he, anyway? Once more, my apologies, hisses a voice filled with malice. It was necessary to drug you in order to make final arrangements. What do you want? Asks Electro. Want is a relative term, says the Shadow, as any student of psychology can tell you. Satisfy one want, and another comes to take its place. Ask instead, what is it I need? He stresses the word need like a law professor making a point. Electro remains silent, thinking, has he gone totally over the edge? The Shadow continues, need is the operative word. I need to make myself a better person. I need to conquer my fears. To that end, you are going to help me conquer one of those fears, an accursed insect who has plagued both our lives. Spider-Man? Asks Electro, still feeling around the sphere for an opening. There is a sharp hiss in answer to his question. Look, says Electro, I can help you track down Spider-Man. I'll even go with you if that's what you want. I hate that wall crawler too, you know, so... Oh yes, interrupts the shadowy figure. Hate. Hate is the right word for how I feel about that creature, and you will help me destroy him. You will help me in a fashion you cannot guess, without any chance of subversion or betrayal. With that, an inhuman arm reaches for a massive switch. The lights come on around the room as the machinery starts up. Electro gets a full view of his prison, a clear ball of insulated material supported in a massive collection of coils, generators, and wires. Far above him, nested at the highest point of the huge machine that entraps him, is the shadowy form of his captor. Electro cannot see his captor clearly from his prison, but he can feel the insanely evil grin, the eyes burning with hatred, as more switches are thrown and the machine throbs with an inhuman life. The last of the switches is thrown, and corpulent fingers close around a large switch, pulling it down into a red-marked area on the gauge. Jets of electricity shoot through the glass ball, and Electro, who should be invulnerable to electricity, feels the pain, a tingling that shakes his entire body, almost tearing him apart. Then comes the release of total darkness, as his mind closes to the pain. End of interlude, and I think end of the recording. It's all set up very nicely. I am enjoying this way more than I was expecting. I was honestly expecting this to be kind of rubbish, but actually it's pretty charming. It lacks something in the kind of specifics of the writing. I feel as though a lot of the quips could have done with a little bit more workshopping. But overall, it feels absolutely like a Spider-Man story, and I really like the interludes where you get to see what's happening to Electro. That is just fabulous. Great idea. So, yes, I'm going to go away. I'm going to play Marvel Superheroes TM, The Amazing Spider-Man TM, Gamebook 1, City of Darkness, on my own time. I will be back for you in just a few moments with some closing remarks. Tatty bye. I have finished Marvel Superheroes TM, The Amazing Spider-Man TM, Gamebook 1, City in Darkness, and perhaps inevitably, I enjoyed it more than I was expecting to. I've been doing this podcast a long time now, and I think on some level, I'm always expecting that at some point I'll get jaded with the whole medium of gamebooks, but it turns out it's a form of entertainment I'm still very keen on, and I think that means I'm always looking for reasons to enjoy whatever book I happen to be playing for the podcast. While there have been some books over the years that I've definitely found a struggle, so long as the book can clear the basic hurdles of functionality, I'm generally going in with a sense of optimism and looking for things that I like rather than things I don't like. In general, I'm quite a negative person, so it's nice I've got this one thing I do where that really doesn't apply. Even though I'm not a fan of Marvel generally, I've found this an engaging book to spend time with. It's not perfect by any means, I've got plenty of bones to pick with it, but what it did do was sell me on the fantasy of being Spider-Man in a Spider-Man story that felt like it could easily have come from contemporary comics. It's absolutely determined to serve up everything you might have expected going in. If you had asked me to write a Spider-Man game book, I'd have started by making a big list of stuff I definitely wanted to include, and I think it would probably have looked very similar to the list we've got here. The villain is obviously Dr. Octopus, who is given an unwilling assist from Electro. The author manages to find a hook that allows some minor cameos from other recognisable villains from the comics, and you can briefly hang out with Reed Richards from the Fantastic Four. That cameo is brilliant because you can accidentally get caught up investigating an alien flying saucer that turns out to be a trade delegation from an alien race. It leads to a failed ending to the main story, but more importantly, it highlights that Reed Richards and the Fantastic Four's bread and butter is dealing with cosmic threats, while Spider-Man is generally pounding the mean streets of New York City and getting into fistfights with muggers. Again, I'm far from an expert here, but my basic level of Marvel knowledge is enough to recognise that there's a fun contrast being made between the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. It seems strange to describe a story about a madman causing a citywide blackout to pursue a vendetta against a man dressed in arachnid-themed spandex as grounded, but all things are relative, and compared to Galactus the Eater of Worlds, Spider-Man's villains tend to have more relatable motivations like money and revenge. That combination of grounded elements and proper comic book nonsense is perhaps the secret sauce that makes Spider-Man one of the most popular Marvel characters. Daredevil has some of the same characteristics, but Daredevil has always come across as more po-faced, and his villains tend to feel a bit more gritty than Spider-Man's collection of deeply weird eccentrics. The structure of the book is a mixed bag, but on balance I think it works quite well. The opening is linear, arguably too linear given its length, but it does a great job of introducing all the key elements of a Spider-Man story. You've got the web-slinging opening paragraph, followed by a fight with some questionably dressed goons robbing an armoured car, and that gives a good overview of both Spider-Man's capabilities and the kinds of crimes he gets involved in thwarting. Then it's off to the Daily Bugle to get chewed out by J. Jonah Jameson, which showcases the dichotomy between Spider-Man's superhero identity and the reality of Peter Parker's low-income gig as a freelance photographer. The book then dispatches you to do a bit of sleuthing in the company of another freelancer, and the villainous Dr. Octopus causes a citywide blackout and paints the sky in lightning to demand that Spider-Man surrender. Once you've done the obligatory bit of following the other reporter around, you're finally turned free to explore the city as Spider-Man and find out exactly what's going on and who is behind it. It's the last bit of the lengthy intro that kind of feels like a drag. You have to follow the freelancer Sam to the electric company, and by that point I was desperate to be let off the leash. It does have a point in that it provides you with a few clues to follow up later in the book, and it shows the reader what investigating looks like before asking them to do the same thing, but I don't think this degree of handhold is really necessary even for younger readers. It winds up feeling just a bit too stifling. I think it would have made more sense to have the blackout strike while Peter Parker is at the Daily Bugle, and then replace palling around with Sam with some kind of action sequence which could drop another clue or two for you to follow up on your investigations subsequently. You could have had a fun little fight with a D-tier Spider-Man villain at the Daily Bugle, and that would have been far more interesting than what we actually get. Thankfully, once you get past the setup, things get a lot more interesting and a lot more fun. You suddenly get given a bunch of different options to explore in whatever order you think best. There's all manner of different leads to chase down, and while only one of them will take you to the final showdown, the process of chasing down different possibilities creates a whole host of engaging set pieces, and most of them really do feel like they could have come from a comic book. You can try and wrangle some information from Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, and he'll try and use what he knows to extract a favour from Spider-Man and deploy a bunch of goons if Spider-Man doesn't fancy being in hock to a crime lord. A trip to the UN leads to a confrontation with a version of Hobgoblin, the oldie price-matched version of the classic Spider-Man villain, the Green Goblin. You can go in search of various potential villains who might have been behind the blackout of the city and get a little potted history for each of them. You get to feel like captain of your destiny, and all the little mini-adventures associated with your investigations are thematically strong and they feel right for the character. One thing where I do think the book shows itself to be a product of its time is the way in which it does explain, sometimes to a fault, the backstory of the various Marvel characters you encounter along the way. It's clearly keen to make this book approachable for relative novices to the world of Marvel Comics, but it also wants to throw in a few deep cuts for the true believers. That's something that's a lot easier in the post-internet age because, through the magic of search engines and the efforts of comic book nerds, there's no character so obscure that you can't find information about them online. In 1987, the author feels that he needs to provide enough information about each and every Marvel character that any player can grasp the essentials of who they are. Comics being what they are, this sometimes involves quite a bit of exposition. Hobgoblin in particular needs a lot of context to get across that he's different from the Green Goblin, and at this point in the comics timeline there have been multiple different incarnations of Green Goblin that Hobgoblin definitely isn't. It feels like overkill in 2026, but I think would have made all the sense in the world in 1987. I did enjoy the passing reference to Will-O-the-Wisp, a proper deep cut from Spider-Man's back catalogue in 1987. I very much enjoyed looking up who Will-O-the-Wisp was and where he had appeared, but in 1987 your only real option for finding out more would have been to scour the racks of your local comic store in search of one of the 6 issues in which he had appeared up to that point, and that feels like quite the task. I love a really stupid C or D tier villain with a really stupid name, so I was delighted to be introduced to Will-O-the-Wisp in this book, though he's still less stupid than my favourite stupid villain, Paste Pot Pete, later renamed the Trapster by cowards, who fights with a squirt gun filled with superglue while wearing an oversized beret. There is an obvious love for the source material here that you don't always get with work-for-hire game books based on existing properties. I love Dave Morris's work, but I didn't get the impression that his Transformers books were informed by a deep knowledge of the lore. Once you've explored all the possible leads and got into various scrapes, you can head into the sewers for the inevitable final battle with Dr. Octopus. The actual lead that sends you to the finale makes sense and ties in nicely with Electro being the key figure in Dr. Octopus's plan. Ultimately, it's returning to the scene of his jailbreak that unlocks progression, and that's a really sensible decision. The final battle with Doc Ock is simple but perfectly well designed and leads to a range of possible endings, though I will say that the book kind of got my back up by scolding you for beating the stuffing out of Dr. Octopus if you choose the violent option to resolve the situation. Beating the stuffing out of supervillains is a pretty core Spider-Man activity, and the book has no such qualms about laying into the albino crocodile in the sewer system, but I suppose they were keen to make sure this book was suitable for younger readers, so it's not a big deal. It does have that big fight feel, but I think it could have stood to have a little bit more peril than it actually does. Dr. Octopus doesn't come across as a physical threat to Spider-Man, and I think a moment of crisis at the last minute would have done a lot to make defeating him feel that bit more special. In general, the book does action sequences fairly well. One of the most important elements in this kind of book is not making the hero look stupid or weak unless it's strictly relevant to the plot, and the author is clearly aware of this and has designed the set pieces with that in mind. In general, as we saw in the recorded playthrough, failing a roll during an action sequence isn't going to lead to an immediate negative consequence, it's just going to change the dynamics of the fight and force you to make another roll. Often you'll be given a choice of how to approach a fight with different approaches leading to different rolls and different potential outcomes. The action sequences feel quite similar to the best bits of Way of the Tiger, but with the distinct advantage that they don't ultimately devolve into kicking each other in the shins until someone runs out of health. There's a place for attritional combat systems, but superhero games are really not it. A fight with mooks in a comic is usually only going to take up a handful of panels, and you want to bring some of that energy to the gamebook by resolving combat quickly. Even if you botch every roll going, which is quite unlikely, you won't be getting instantly beaten. You're likely to be penalised with a loss of some health, but still ultimately win the day. Death is very much on the table though, because this book is not messing about with its health loss. You start out with 32 health, which feels quite generous until I realise the book will happily knock off between 10 and 15 health in one go. You're looking at between 3 and 4 good hits to finish you off, and there doesn't seem to be any way to get health back. I don't mind this. You could have started with a health of 4 and lost 1 health point at a time, but in a weird way, having 32 health and losing 10 feels more impactful. It makes it feel like a fight between powerful super beings, even though mechanically it's no different than if you divided all the values by 10. It's a bit like how the Robotech role-playing game had mega damage, which was mechanically problematic but felt absolutely awesome. If you get hit by one of Hobgoblin's bombs and it deals 1 point of damage, that feels oddly unimpressive. If you get hit by the bomb and it deals 15, you're suddenly paying attention, not least because when you look at your stats, 32 health just feels like quite a lot, and maybe it is quite a lot if you're participating in a college wrestling match or a fight in a school playground, but bombs are a whole different story. Sometimes the mechanically clunky thing is actually the right thing to do, and this is a really good example of that. I've come round to the idea that the same thing is kind of true of the character sheet as well. I was 100% correct when I guessed that the various stats for fighting, reason and the like would turn out to be mechanically irrelevant. Because the stats are pre-generated, the author gets to simply decide how difficult he wants the roll to be and set the target number appropriately. This is particularly obvious with web slinging, where the target numbers are much higher than anything you're going to find elsewhere in the game. Having a web slinging score which is 6 full points higher than your next highest stat confers no advantage whatsoever. From a pure design perspective, this is a little irritating. There's absolutely no need to have the stats at all. The text would function perfectly well without them. The text could simply ask you to roll a d6 and get higher than a 3 or whatever. This is something that tends to be an issue in tabletop games with flexible difficulty numbers. When running a game, there's always a tendency for the GM to set the difficulty number according to the character's ability so that they have a chance to succeed or fail depending on the circumstances. The desire to create tension with the dice is understandable, but it runs the risk of making a character's actual strengths and weaknesses feel irrelevant, which is certainly what happens here. It doesn't feel as though Spider-Man is more than twice as good at web slinging as he is at fighting, for example. However, there are some positives to this approach as well. The character sheet tells you something about Spider-Man. It tells you that he's more intuitive than he's actually book smart, that he's more agile than he is physically strong. It tells you something about his psyche, which is broadly surplus to requirement, since I don't think you even test that stat. I described his character sheet as a top trump card, and I think that's the best way to think about it. If you read multiple books in the series, then you can compare Spider-Man with other heroes, which is always fun. It's a shame that the system here doesn't give us a human baseline to show how much stronger and faster than a normal person Spider-Man is. That would have been really helpful for contextualising what the numbers actually mean. Which is, to be fair, nothing. You can also use Spider-Man's different areas of strength to inform the decisions you make to a small extent. Knowing he's very good at the web slinging does push you towards taking the option to use webbing when it's presented, and that does generally turn out to be a good idea, even if from a mechanical perspective the score doesn't matter as much as it should. I think this book would have been improved if the author had used descriptors for the stats rather than numbers. If Spider-Man's fighting score had been above average and his web slinging score had been described as exceptional, you'd have got the same sense of variable ability without running into the mechanical problems I've described. Interestingly, this is the approach that the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game takes. You get a descriptor which ranges from feeble to monstrous, and I'm not sure why that wasn't imported directly into the gamebook, particularly given that Jeff Grubb worked on that role-playing game. As a random aside, the Marvel Superheroes RPG is an amazing snapshot of a particular time in the development of role-playing games. It's trying really hard to be friendly and approachable, the sort of thing we would maybe call a systems-light game now, but because of the specific time in which it was created, it still can't quite get past the crunchy wargame-inspired rules that were everywhere in 1987. So you get a nice descriptor for stats and a descriptor for the difficulty of a challenge, but to actually resolve it, you need to look things up on a table and roll percentile dice, the crunchiest of all dice. It's this amazing hybrid of looking forwards and being trapped in the past. To be strictly fair to Marvel Superheroes, this isn't a design approach that's actually vanished. There's plenty of games kicking about that ought to have been rules light, but which wind up being based on the Dungeons and Dragons unfathomably ugly D20 system, because that's what people think a role-playing game is. There is one bit of the mechanics in this gamebook which I do very much like, and that is the karma system. Well, technically I mostly like it, but the core premise that you have a stock of karma that you can use to influence die rolls when it matters the most is a good one. It's a resource management mechanic, and God knows I'm a fan of those, but it ties very nicely into the superhero themes. When their back is against a wall and it matters most, a superhero often finds a way to dig deep and achieve the seemingly impossible, and this represents that very nicely. Deciding when to use karma and how much to use feels like a weighty decision, and I like that very much. I'm less keen on the book docking you karma points when it decides you haven't been suitably heroic. On paper, it makes sense. It's asking you to lean into the character and try to role-play being one of the good guys, but that's something that works better in role-playing games where you have more freedom to creatively interpret what that means for your particular character. Part of this is down to my personal issues with being told what to do. I have a tendency to chafe against authority in some situations. I'm generally pretty chill about being asked to do things, and I've no problem with deferring to authority when I accept that the situation requires it. The problem comes when I disagree either with the validity of the authority or the decisions I'm being asked to take. So in the case of this gamebook, I totally agree that Spider-Man should just ignore the heckler in the street at the start, but I don't see anything wrong with winding up J. Jonah Jameson, a man who constantly belittles Peter Parker, and indeed all of his employees, and is trying to use the Daily Bugle to wage a propaganda war against Spider-Man. Pushing Jameson towards some kind of apoplectic breakdown feels like a net benefit for his underlings at the Daily Bugle, and honestly for New York as a whole. And that's the risk when you include morality systems in your game. You can end up creating binary choices for situations that feel rather more nuanced than that. Overall, though, the karma system is a great addition that feels both flavourful and mechanically useful. City in Darkness is not an especially replayable book. Wading through the opening is a slog, and once you know what you're doing, it's fairly easy to see almost everything the book has to offer in a single playthrough. It would have benefited from a terser style, which would have given more space for additional sections to explore on subsequent playthroughs. Once you've beaten it, there's no great incentive to go back for more, except to check off the handful of things you may have missed. This is a gamebook that cleaves closer to the book side rather than the game side, but I think that's often going to be the case with books based on existing IP. you just don't have the same freedom to improvise, and you want to make sure that you're giving the player an authentic Spider-Man experience, and that necessarily constrains what you can do. I will say that it's refreshing to see comics-adjacent media that feels like it's actually aimed at kids rather than overgrown man-children like me. There's an innocence to this book which I very much enjoyed, and it leans into the stupid Silver Age vibe, which is probably my favourite end of the superhero comic spectrum. Marvel media has grown more self-consciously mythic as time has gone on, especially in their cinematic offerings, and it's really nice to see something that has the energy of an old-fashioned 22-page one-shot, complete with robot fights and unnecessarily convoluted mad science machines. Dr. Octopus could have just blown up a substation and hired a skywriter to taunt Spider-Man. That would be cheaper, but he's a proper supervillain, so he's devised a demented machine that runs off supervillain powers to get to the exact same endpoint. I think part of my problem with modern superhero comics and related media is that all too often they seem to be trying to get me to take them seriously. It's not universal, there is some silliness to be found around the edges, but I do think there's something faintly ridiculous about treating a bunch of people dressed like clowns fighting a bunch of other people dressed like clowns as if it's in any way, shape or form a serious business. Overall though, I think City in Darkness is a surprisingly fun book, mostly because of how hard it's trying to capture something of the essence of Spider-Man comics in the mid-80s. From a pure design perspective, there's not much going on that's all that interesting, but the book is perfectly functional, and while it lacks depth, there was just enough going on to keep me entertained during the time I spent with it. It's not going to change the world, but it's good fun, and sometimes, like this time, that's enough. That is all for this episode. I hope you'll join me in a couple of weeks for the next fighting fantasy book, Secret of Salamonis, by the great Steve Jackson, with an assist from Jonathan Green. That is a mouth-watering proposition for any fighting fantasy fan, so I really hope it lives up to the talents of the creative team. In the meantime, you can get in touch with me via email at hjdoomretrofun, or one word, at gmail.com, or by following me on Blue Sky at hjdoom. This has been a production of Doom Industries. Thank you very much for listening. Take care, and I'll see you soon.